If anybody said, do you vote Labour or do you vote Conservative? We'd say, we vote Communist. If they said, are you a Catholic or are you a Protestant? We'd say, we're atheists.
That was actor, playwright Janet Behan. And I'm John Lee.
And I'm Martin Nutty. Welcome to another episode of Irish Stew, the podcast for the global Irish nation.
This episode of Irish Stew is sponsored by the Irish Heritage Tree Program. Celebrate your Irish roots by planting native trees for family and friends in the beautiful Golden Vale of Ireland. Go to irishheritagetree.com and use the exclusive discount code today. It's IrishStew10 for 10% off. That code again is IrishStew and the numeral 10. Keep the heritage of Ireland green and growing by going to irishheritagetree.com.
Hi, this is Martin Nutty with Irish Stew, and welcome to another episode. I'm joined here by my cross-town partner in crime, John Lee. John, what's going on today? Who have we got coming up?
We've got someone who I got to know maybe a dozen years ago, and great to be with her again, Janet Behan. And in talking to Janet, we have the global Irish conversation going on here in Irish Stew. And this conversation, in a way, is going to take us from Dublin to London to Belfast to New York. And if we had talked to Janet a couple of weeks ago, we would have added Malta to our date line for this interview. I got to know Janet from her play, Brendan at the Chelsea, which came over for a very successful Off-Broadway run in New York with the brilliant Adrian Dunbar in the role of Brendan Behan, who happens to be Janet's uncle. And we're going to talk a little bit more about that play and some other aspects. But Janet, first of all, welcome. Thanks for joining us.
Thank you very much for having me. And could I just drop in Sussex in your in your stew, because that's where I'm speaking from. Yeah, we moved down from London 10 years ago to the seaside. So.
Oh, beautiful. I was looking at your Facebook page and I saw references actually to the seaside. So, and then of course, if we talk about Brendan, we could throw in Paris and we could throw in other spots in the UK. And so we'll get going on all that. But it was really a great moment in my freelance period when I was signed on to help promote Brendan at the Chelsea. It was a really fantastic experience. I saw the play maybe 5 times. I've read the play, so I have a lot of connection to it. But we'll get into that in just a minute. This is the part of the program where we go back and find out how you got to where you are, and this is also where Martin Nutty figures out that you probably are related closely. So, Martin, hand it over to you.
Well, Janet, I actually do have a Behan grandmother.
You don't?
I do indeed. But we usually say in Ireland, there's always kind of 2 degrees of separation. And we might get into that a little bit later, but I'm not going to. This is about you. It's certainly not about me. So let's kind of, roll it back a little bit and kind of understand a bit of your background story. Unlike many members of your family, you didn't start out as a writer at all. You started out as an actor.
Yeah.
Was that deliberate, or were you trying to step away a little bit from the writing thing?
Well, I think to me, how it began was when I was growing up, Brendan was very famous. My dad was in the papers a lot because of his leading strikes on the South Bank, etc. Dominic was always in the paper. Sometimes the 3 of them were in the papers because they were having a feud. But one thing that I took away from all this was that it was very, very important. I'm talking about when I was a very little girl, very important to be famous. And I thought it would be dreadful to die and not be famous. And I didn't really mind how I got to be famous. I could be a ballet dancer or an ice skater or something like that. But I had this thing planted in my head. Plus, I had 2 parents who were constantly fighting And I think I just began to act as a very small child as a way of distracting them. I used to put a tea towel on my head and pretend I was the old man of the sea. I think that was one of my earliest performances. So it was just kind of ingrained in me to act, to play the fool, to distract, you know.
And the circumstances of your childhood, I read your sister's piece, Ruth, I believe, who's a musician, called Stalin on the Mantelpiece. Yeah. And it certainly depicts, let's say, a rather grim situation in London, because that's where you grew up, or where you started out life, at least. What brought your father over there? And tell us a little bit about that time.
Well, I would say but my father and his brothers and his father and his mother were all very involved politically, both in nationalist politics and socialist politics, I'm proud to say. But, I mean, it's hard to remember now how poverty-stricken Dublin was at the time when my father was growing up. And in the end, his mother he said, you know, you can't stay living in the house if you don't find work. And he said, well, there isn't any work. And she said, well, there's work in England, you know, which is a kind of a completely off-told tale, isn't it? And so off he went to England. He was already very involved, as I say, in socialist politics. And my Yorkshire grandparents, had a house in Kennington that let out lodgings to just generally happened to be people on the left. So it was a kind of a place that people on the left coming from Ireland or coming from anywhere really got to hear about. So he rolled up one day, maybe 3 days after he got to London, and the door was answered by this very gorgeous young Yorkshire woman. And my father said, got any rooms? And she said, got any rooms? And I think something like 3 months later they were married.
Oh my gosh.
So that was how it began, you know. And you talk about my childhood being grim. I didn't know it was grim. Maybe later on, various therapists pointed out to me that perhaps it wasn't all that it might have been. But it was hugely intellectually stimulating.
Janet, I was reminded of the quote from Frank McCourt, when I look back at my childhood, I wonder how I survived at all. It was, of course, a miserable childhood. A happy childhood is hardly worth your while. That occurred to me when, you know, that wasn't miserable to you, I'm sure. But
I have to say it wasn't a miserable childhood. It was a deprived, very happy childhood, but took a bit of recovering from, shall we say.
And when you mentioned, if you saw me distracted here, when you mentioned about being famous, I was trying to find the quote in Brendan at the Chelsea where he talks about like the fear of being ordinary.
Yes.
And I couldn't quite come up with it. But
yeah. I've always had a fear of being ordinary, just an ordinary human being, you might say. Hey.
Sorry, but I digress.
Yeah.
So from what I understand, Janet, your schooling seems to have been somewhat sporadic, but I think somewhere around 1972, you got accepted to the Central School of Speech and Drama, and that's really what kind of kicked your acting career in there. Was this simply a case of, you know, having grown up as a Behan? I'm guessing, you know, your grandfather, Stephen Behan, you know, was kind of given to kind of reading the classics, etc., that you're reading like other members of the family, and schooling itself was probably pretty freaking boring. And so the first education that might have been worth your while was going to the Central School. Is that a fair characterization of what was going on?
No, not really. So sorry. Me and my sister, you know, because my parents were communists, this is when we were at primary school. If anybody said, do you vote Labour or do you vote Conservative? We'd say, we vote communist. And if they said, are you a Catholic or are you a Protestant? We'd say, we're atheists. So we were picked on, quite rightly, horribly bullied. Plus, our parents went out to work before we had to go to school. So we would quite often get ourselves as far as the school gates. We'd always be late. And then, my sister was 2 years older than me, so we were in the same school for a long time. And we'd just turn around and go home. And I used to put, we had a wind-up gramophone and some 78s of Scheherazade. And I used to get some old curtains and I would just dance around the living room to Scheherazade. So that was the first part of my education. Second part of my education, I don't know why I didn't go. And we ended up paying, it's a long story, but we ended up paying £18,000 a year for our son to go to school in a place very similar to the free education that I just frigging failed to show up at. And, all I can say is I'm cross and I should have done it, but, I didn't. And then later on, we moved to Shoreham by Sea and there was a lot of sort of hippiness. And I got into the kind of the drink and the drugs culture around about the age of 16. So that was that. I was so lucky to get into Central because I didn't know it was hard to get into drama school. I didn't know anything about it. I barely ever even been to the theatre, to be honest. And there were 2,000 applicants for 15 women's places that year. And it was the only drama school I applied to and I got in. So, oh my God, talk about a close shave.
Jan, I have one thought. This is like one of these theories I have with guests, and then they say, no, that's not really the case. But, Martin was kind of talking about why performance over writing, which seems to be kind of a family thing. Of course, writing becomes very important ultimately for you. But reading your biography or one of the articles I read about you, the idea of seeing your father out there speaking in labor rallies and seeing everyone he was just your dad, but now you're seeing thousands of people hanging on his every word. It struck me that might have planted a bit of a seed for you in terms of kind of being out there and performing and having people listen to you.
No, not really.
See, like I said, this is the part where I come up with the theory and the guest says no.
I mean, you might be right, but actually my memory of those rallies it was so boring. Just a little child. All I could see was the backs of people's knees, walking along shouting. And sometimes I'd say, can I hold the banner? And they'd say yes. And then the banner would be very heavy and I'd have to give it back. And, but I mean, the thing is that in the same way that all Irish people, seems to me, can sing, because all Irish people sing, all Irish people can tell stories and get up and do a party piece because it's just part of the culture, isn't it? So there wasn't anything to overcome.
So let me ask you this. We ask our guests about their Irish identity and how that kind of helps or hinders and how they see themselves as relating to Ireland. You grew up in England. Obviously, your dad is Irish. You have lots of extended family in Ireland. But how do you think of yourself? As Anglo-Irish, as English? How does that fit?
I think of myself as somebody who is always on her knees begging and pleading to be allowed in to Ireland, culturally and psychologically. I got a lot of castings for Irish parts when I was young because of my name. And then I'd turn up and they go, oh, you're not Irish. And I'd go, oh, okay, I'm not Irish. And conversely, I think I wasn't getting seen for English parts sometimes because they thought, oh, she's Irish, she won't be able to do it. I was working, I've got a lot, not just family, but I've got a long association with Ireland, especially in the north, because I went and did a schools tour there in what would it have been, 77 or something like that. And then I went and worked at the Lyric in Belfast, where the play ultimately was put on in the 1980s, early 1980s. When I was doing the schools tour, I thought, I know what I'll do. I'll get an audition at the Abbey. And I went down from Coleraine, where I was staying, I got the train down to Connolly and went into my little B&B and did myself up, set off to the Abbey. And I did Teresa's speech from The Hostage, which I thought would give him the hint, you know. And Tomas McConnor said after I'd done it, he said, "What part of Ireland are you from?" And I said, "Oh, I'm not from Ireland, I'm from London." And he said, "Ah, no, we could never employ you before one of our own people."
Oh, dear.
And instead of stamping my foot and saying, "Now look here, don't you understand, my good man, that I'm Brendan Behan's niece?" I was too proud, and I slunk away, and with my heart broken. And unfortunately, I'd missed the last train back up to Belfast, so I had to spend the night in the B&B all on my own. But, and I, as you can tell, I've never really got over it. But I think also I've always felt that there's been a kind of an ambivalence towards the Behans in Dublin. I don't know about the rest of Ireland, but Dublin certainly. And there was a thing that happened to me that I used in the play.
Yeah,
which
absolutely.
was I went into O'Donoghue's, and there was a picture of Dominic on the wall, and I said, "Oh yeah, that's my uncle. I'm a Behan." And this man turned round to me with such hostility and he said, "It's the likes of you fucking Behans that give us Irish a bad name." And I thought, "Oh, okay, so I may be Irish enough, but perhaps I'm not respectable Irish enough." So it's a complicated situation, isn't it? Really, but no, I'm very torn, very neurotic about the whole thing.
Well, you started to bring up the play, so Brenda, it's Chelsea, and I know there's a kind of an interesting leap of faith here in you even writing the play. So why don't you describe how that gelled?
Well, my husband Dermot and I, we have an autistic son, and very soon after he was diagnosed, it became clear that really nobody could look after him apart from me. Dermot is a TV director and was, for God's sake, he was working in Africa, he was working in New York, he was all over the shop, but very little of it in Stoke Newington with his loving wife and children. But because of our business connections, people would say, there's a very famous play called Spoonface Steinberg about an autistic child, and a wonderful actress called Catherine Hunter was going to do it on the stage, and Catherine and her director came round and asked me about Finn and just met Finn and all that kind of thing, and I thought, oh well, that's nice, isn't it? And I went to see Catherine doing it at the National Theatre Studios, and it was stunning and a privilege to be there, really. And then at the end of it, everybody got out their diaries and said, "What are you doing next April? Could we put it into the West End? What theatre do you think?" And I just sort of got back on the bus. This is a little bit like my Tomas McConnor story, isn't it? And I slunk away, heartbroken. So then Helen McCrory, lovely Helen McCrory, who's just died, she came round with a telly director because they were doing a telly version. And after they'd gone, I thought, I'm just feeling a little bit used here. You know, I have to face it, there is nothing for me, apart from maybe a little bit of pain in these occasions. So sometime later, somebody phoned up and said, "Oh, I've been given your name by Sonia Friedman. You might know somebody who's a theatre director. I don't know if she's as famous in New York as she is over here, but she's like queen over here. I've been given your name, and of course you might know somebody who could do a stage version of Brendan Behan's New York." And sort of what my little boy used to call a red ball of rage. The red ball of rage riz up in me, and I said, "Yeah, I do, I could." And he said, "Oh, okay, well, we'll bring the book round and you can do a treatment." So I said, "Fine." And I put the phone down and I went online and found out what a treatment was because I didn't know. I went to the City Lit and did a playwriting course twice. And my very, very best friend was going to New York she's a she does everything, but she's a wonderful singer, Maria Friedman, and she was doing her debut at the Café Carlisle, and she had a flat. She had a free flat in Trump Tower. It was Andrew Lloyd Webber's guest apartment. So I thought, well, I'll come along for that. And I went and I did some research, and I met lovely Stanley Bard in his Willy Wonka office at the Chelsea and everything. So then we got maybe a year later, we got a workshop at the National Theatre, and Adrian Dunbar was cast in the lead. And then he came around the following day with a big panettone and said, I really want to do your play. So that was great. We worked on it together for a couple of years, and then we put on our own production. And then some years after that, the Lyric in Belfast produced it professionally, which is a great relief because I'm not a producer, and I can't do other people's VAT without great pain.
I probably should mention to the folks who aren't familiar with the Chelsea Hotel in New York. So the play is set over, I don't know if it's 72 hours or 48 hours. It's a very short time frame in Brendan Behan's life at the Chelsea Hotel in New York's 23rd Street on the West Side, which is a famous artist colony in a way, full of artists and creative people. In Brendan's era and continuing on the rock and roll musicians, later on. So it was quite an environment to be in. But we'll get to that in a second. So you're at the Lyric Theatre. They've just opened a new building, right? Yes. And you're an important element of their launch, I would guess.
Yes, we were in a small. It's not that small. It's the Norton studio, and that's where the play opened and sold out every night of the 4-week run. Just lovely.
And then they got the extremely ambitious idea of bringing the production to New York for an off-Broadway run. And just on a personal note, I spoke with Mark Carruthers. He was here in New York, and that's how I got signed on to help out with the promotion of the play. And a tremendous move. I just wonder, I reminded last night, and I told Martin about how close this play was to, in a way, foundering out at sea. Do you remember the story?
Yes. I mean, I don't really understand your union politics over there, but the set was on a ship, and the ship had to go to Baltimore instead of New York?
Yeah, I think it went to Halifax in Canada first, and then instead of going to New York, it was going to go to Baltimore.
Yeah.
And that was going to mess plans up dramatically. So do you recall? I mean, I think they sent up trucks to Halifax. Yeah. They had the consulate got involved to unravel the customs issues because the stuff was supposed to go to New York, not Canada. So that was a whole nother thing. And I think actually one performance was canceled as a result, one preview.
Yes, it was. And it also meant that I got there expecting it all to be sort of nice and waiting for me. And they were still getting the set in, and which was nice in a way because it meant that I could actually help. I did. There's something very different about renting a theatre space in New York because all you get is the space. And if you've got a hammer, they say, no, but you can rent one from the shop up the road. Have you got, there's nothing apart from the space. So I was quite helpful in renting hammers and fetching coffees and things like that. And we all, I remember Adrian was helping to put the bed together, which unfortunately broke. Can I just say that we had the most wonderful, wonderful stage manager called Steve Ginty, and he died recently. And I just, I'm so sad about that. Yeah, he was fabulous. But he died after a very long illness. So God bless you, Keith.
Let me ask you this. I don't think we can have any kind of conversation about you and your extended family without kind of talking about creativity. Is it a gene? or is it environmental?
Oh, I don't know. I don't know, Professor. What do you think? Professor Nutty.
You could switch that around and you get a very bad exactly. Jerry Lewis movie.
I think a lot of it is environment, isn't it? You know, somehow you're given the permission, aren't you? Because you see it around you. Sometimes it's a desperate desire to get away from what your parents are doing, and sometimes it's just the inevitable result of being their children, really. You know,
because I'm thinking about your grandparents. Interestingly, your grandfather Stephen literally grew up 400 yards from my grandfather in Dublin.
Really,
and I'm thinking about he lived on Russell Street, and my grandfather lived on Fitzroy Street, and literally just on the other side of the canal. So your grandfather was an inner city Dubliner, whereas I guess mine was suburban. And there are the kind of distinctions sometimes Dubliners actually might get into, but let's not go there. But the Ireland, first of all, I have to mention the fact that your grandfather Stephen was part of Michael Collins's squad. And for those that don't know a lot about Irish history, the squad was essentially a group of IRA operatives that carried out assassinations. Now, that might get people's backs up because they won't say it was an assassination, it was a war, but actually an assassination is an assassination, whether it's war or not. But the Ireland that your grandfather fought for, I think, may have proved to be a real disappointment. The Ireland of the 20s, 30s, 40s, 50s was a pretty freaking bleak place. Not only was it a bleak place, it was one that was dominated by the Catholic Church. And knowing what little I know of your family, they are not people that would take kindly to any kind of repression or stuff to kind of keep them down. And so your grandfather was a big reader and kind of encouraged that. And I kind of look at it and go like, okay, where does this come from? You know, where's this spark come from? Your grandmother, you know, was a singer, and her brother wrote the Irish National Anthem, Peadar Kearney. So it's just a fascinating genealogical tree. But is your name, is being tied into that a blessing or a curse? You know, like you alluded to the fact that you get calls to do Irish pieces and then you'd show up being English. You would fail to get calls to do English parts because of your Irish name. And because of all those associations with the family, you know, it strikes me as being both a blessing and a curse. Is that fair?
I think that is fair, yeah. It means that certain doors, I mean, ultimately, you just have to decide who you are and do what you're going to do, don't you? And don't let all of this other stuff get in the way, because it's not just me. How many people in the world have one foot in one camp and one in another? And if they had more feet, they could have feet in more camps. You know what I mean? Race, what is it? You know, where you come from, what does it mean? And I think that's a good thing. And I think the more that the world turns and the more we all become a kind of a people stew, not just an Irish stew, the happier maybe we will all be in the end. But yeah, I remember when I was a teenager, my father said to me, he said, "Oh, well, you know, you'll be fine because of the Behan name." And I said, "Oh, no, I'm going to change my name. I'm going to make it on my own," you know. And now, and somebody said to me when the Behan play came out, this other, I hope tongue-in-cheek, other lovely playwright said to me, she said, "You're just cashing in on the family name." And I said, "No, I'm realizing my inheritance here." So yeah, I mean, I love writing and I am a writer and I think I'm a good writer, but I'm not going to turn down the opportunity to get a bit of publicity if it's offered, am I?
Well, you know, if you haven't seen the play, you might sort of glean from this that we're going to see a very positive spin on Brendan Behan in this play. You see it all in it over the course of a couple of days depicted. When Adrian Dunbar is waking up in the first scene, I get a hangover looking at it. I am as hungover as I've ever been in my life watching him kind of wake up. And you kind of see it worse than all. Martin and I were talking. It's funny. It's sad. It's tragic. And, you can see we talked about the races, there's a couple of references there where, he's talking about the Negro entering a college and how great that was. And, the beginning of the opening up of segregation in the U.S. And then talk about a diversity, his sexuality. We were saying he was probably beyond bisexual. If there were more options, he sounds like he would have sampled it. He was all id, and kind of a notorious character in the U.S. in a lot of ways. Like just to get one little anecdote. After one of the performances we had for the Irish American Writers and Artists, we did a talk back with the cast to the audience, and Malachi McCourt was in the crowd that night. As one of the founders of the organization. And I won't attempt to do a Malachi impersonation, but he says, I want to correct one misconception about Brendan Behan. The idea that he was the first person to appear on television drunk. I was.
Oh, well done. Yeah. Oh, well.
So how was it being in New York and having a play, off-Broadway play is a big deal in New York?
Oh, it was just lovely. It was just lovely. I mean, when I first went to New York on that occasion that I said, when we were in the Trump Tower, I spent about 3 or 4 days wandering around thinking, I don't get it. I just don't get this place. I couldn't find any tube stations, and I got kind of a tube station blindness. So they say, it's just a couple of blocks. And I've been walking. These blocks are very, very long, and I don't understand the attraction at all. And suddenly, I just went, oh, I see, and I fell head over heels in love with it. And I've been back a few times, and I've been in love with it ever since. So it was just a huge, huge. I mean, you can't imagine how big a treat that was for me. To stand outside a theatre with my name on it in 42nd Street, which has got to some people, maybe it's just a street, but to us foreigners, it's so romantic. Yeah.
As a young man that came to New York in the 1980s, sadly, 42nd Street back then was a slightly different place. It's interesting how much it has changed actually over the decades, and you arrived at the right time to be on there. But it was notorious actually in the early 1980s as a red light district, interestingly. And it just kind of tells you to such a great degree, how New York has evolved, in a fairly short time, and how it always evolves. But just rolling back to your uncle Brendan, you can't really talk about his life without talking about his addiction. And it's interesting, does your play give pointers as to the source of his addiction? I can imagine, let's say, a guy that is bisexual, certainly growing up in Dublin, that would certainly not be a welcome type of behavior, especially in kind of the repressive Ireland of the 1950s and 1960s. Or did his addiction have some other origin? And to what degree do other members of the family talk about his addiction? What can be done? Because clearly by the 1960s, Brendan's deeply in trouble, as your play lays out.
Well, when I first went to Dublin obviously I went as a child, but as I first went as a teenager, very young teenager, I must say, I wasn't really old enough to be in those pubs. It struck me that there was an enormous amount of habitual drinking that I think you could probably, nowadays, you would certainly call that alcoholism, So it wasn't unusual for somebody to drink that much. nobody in the family would say he was homosexual or anything like. Nobody in the family would say that he was an alcoholic. He died of diabetes. He shouldn't have been drinking because he had the diabetes. That was the story. That was the story that they told in probably, in defence of a lot of very vitriolic press. But that's just families looking after themselves, isn't it? Looking after each other. Brendan was a very shy person. He had a very, very pronounced stammer when he was young. And I think he felt, Beatrice, I know, said that he felt he needed a drink in order to be in a public space. And while at the same time as being shy, he was a Behan, and he did want people to know, give him the attention. And he was very clever and, deserved the attention in many ways. So I would say he really did try to stop, and he was quite successful at one stage. There's a part in the play where he has stopped. But
Jenna, why don't we play that right now? The end of a period of sobriety that you capture so beautifully in the play.
Hadn't I bought a drink for me little friend a moment ago and nothing for myself? As if it was the most natural thing in the world, and I took a sip of me coffee and I stared at the brandy. I'd beaten the drink, hadn't I proven that? And I saw how the sunlight glinted off the golden liquid. I admired it purely from an aesthetic point of view. I was not tempted to drink it, and then I thought maybe I should take a sip. Isn't that what millions of other people do all over the world every day? Non-alcoholics have just the one. And then I thought, even if I did take a sip, I'd in all probability find I'd gone off the fucking stuff. And then I thought, maybe I should take a fucking drink, even if I didn't like the taste, just to prove to myself that I was no longer in its thrall, that I'd sooner have a cup of coffee. And I'd see this hand reaching out for the brandy. And the hand is mine. And it's the hand that takes at the brandy. And it's the hand that brings the glass of brandy up to my mouth. And I can hear this voice in the back of my mind screaming a warning to me. And we are white, black, coffee-coloured and beautiful bronze. We are as painful as human life and as exciting. We are men.
That passage always stuck with me, Janet, and Adrian Dunbar's brilliant reading of it as well. Quick observation from me. I was in Ireland for the first time in 1979, and I was there for a few weeks, and I came away saying, in Ireland, you either drink too much or you don't touch a drop.
One of the places that the play had a lot of midwives, should we say, along the way. And one of the places that we had a reading of it early on was the Everyman Theatre in Cork. And I went with the artistic director of the theatre into the pub next door, and the pints of water that were lined up on the bar. And nobody goes into a pub and drinks a pint of water who isn't a recovering alcoholic. It was kind of... the thing is about Irish pubs are so, so wonderful, and they are places of refuge for men with big families. And they're very much an important part of society. So you can't not go just because you don't drink. But on the other hand, to sit in there and watch other people doing it, what a torment.
Yeah, it's obviously the pub culture in Ireland, it's so central to Irish existence.
And they're so good at it. So good at it.
Well, it's a double-edged sword because to me, it provides or is the genesis of a lot of creativity that comes out of Ireland. Let's be honest here. A drink or two can kind of liberate one's inhibitions. I remember some line about Richard Burton and Dylan Thomas talking about, prior to a couple of drinks, Thomas was a dour kind of fellow, but between pints 2 and pints 8, he was one of the funniest persons you ever came across. And then after pint 8, he was incoherent. So there is this kind of sweet spot, but I think any kind of substance abuse comes from a place of unhappiness, comes from a place where you're not entirely comfortable in your own skin. And I think that's to some degree what you're saying, about Brendan. But I also think kind of culturally in Ireland, there is kind of a history, if you will, of heroic drinking. If you ever read the Táin, for example, the famous epic of, Gaelic Irish literature, you will see examples of heroic drinking back, over 2,000 years ago. And so it's this kind of very complicated melange of relationship between alcohol and the Irish and trying to get it right. And I just don't think people were equipped to be able to, talk to it. Clearly your family knew Brendan had difficulty, but they opted to call it diabetes rather than alcoholism. And in the current era, people would say, we need to have an intervention, right? Yeah. We need to get him into therapy. We need to get him into treatment.
Yeah, or there'd be an NHS app, wouldn't there?
Yes,
which you could be directed to. But Beatrice said, other women used to say, can't you control your husband? And she'd say, well, I tried, but what could I do? This peculiar idea that somebody, even someone as close as your wife, could actually, turn that ship around.
But the real danger for Brendan, it strikes me as well, which even compounded the problem, was he became famous for being drunk.
Yes, indeed.
And I think it even compounded the problem and kind of encouraged him along that front. He's the famous drunken Dublin wag, right?
Yeah.
And it was part of a kind of a public performance. Like, how do you ever escape from underneath something like that?
No, especially when the press were so, they don't care whether you're making a fool of yourself, do they? There's some horrendously upsetting footage of Brendan when he was just in the last stages of his life, probably asleep in a car and then getting out and wandering up to the door of the pub, and the pub is shut because it's only morning and that. And, somebody's following him around with a camera, filming that. Not nice. Not nice then. Not that nice now.
Yeah. Well, Janet, we know you've continued on with other great stuff since Brendan at the Chelsea. I just, I have such a connection with that play, personally. Also, I keep in touch with Richard Orr.
Ah, lovely Richard.
I saw him in Belfast a few years ago from the play. He played a great character, George, who's should be his own novel, his own movie. He was a fascinating composer, the best known, probably maybe unfortunately, for Tubby the Tuba. He did a lot of other great stuff. But anyway, moving on. Tell us? I know you've had an interesting COVID era projects, and why don't you bring us up to date?
Okay. Well, it seemed to me when I was attending performances of my play I wrote that Adrian was getting all the attention, and I thought, I'm an actor, perhaps I should write something for me. So I did. I've written a thing. It had a few evolutions, but it's called Why Shouldn't I Go? And it's 3 different Irish women, all of whom have fallen foul of their religion. I've got 2 Catholics and I've got a evangelical Christian for balance. That we performed that in 2019. I performed it. Me and the producer and director Jess Higgs put it on in 2019 with some Arts Council money and some lovely crowdfunding as well. At places, among them the Camden Irish Centre, and people really, really liked it. Nobody mentioned Brendan, which was nice. So I'm doing that again in September in Brighton. It was going to be doing it in the Brighton Fringe, but as you've alluded to, I was in Malta on another project. And last year, we started working on a live version of my grandmother's memoir, Mother of All the Behans, which my father recorded her life story when she was in her 90s and turned it into a book, Mother of All the Behans. And there have been versions of it before. Rosaline Linehan did one, Eileen Pollock did one, but nobody's done it for maybe, 20 years. And years and years ago, my father said, I'll give you the rights to the book. You could do that. That would be good for your career. And I said, well, how dare you? I'm far too young and pretty. And anyway, my career's fine. Thank you very much. But I now think that was a really nice and generous thing to do. And I'm well old enough now to be playing my grandmother. So we started work on that. We had to work on Zoom because of COVID and everything. And then we were going to do a live version of it at our local art centre. But there was the pre-Christmas lockdown in the UK, so we couldn't. So my husband, who is the TV director, who incidentally has just been directing this 6-part series that we were making in Malta, and I had a small part, small but, important to the plot. And so he said, well, why don't I film it? So we turned a corner of the living room. Here, I'll just show you the corner of the living room. There it is, that corner of the living room there, into Kathleen's, sitting room kind of thing. And he filmed it, and we put in, because she also at the same time in her 90s, she made an album called When All the World Is Young. So we used songs from the album and an abridged version of the book, sticking pretty closely to just the things that Kathleen did, not her famous brother, not her famous son, not her, revolutionary husband or her other boys and girls, just Kathleen's life, because we're women. Jess and I go back a long way. We originally worked together in a feminist theatre company in the 70s called Les Earth Mallards. And, so we just wanted to tell the woman's story. And we made a film of it, and it's currently available. You'll be pleased to hear. Is this the shameless plug moment?
Yes, absolutely. Go for it.
It's available as a digital offering at the Brighton Fringe, and so if you go to, it's quite complicated because it's a platform at the Brighton Fringe. If you know what, a digital venue at the Brighton Fringe. This will make sense to young people, maybe people my age, not so much. So you go to thelivingrecord.com/events/Kathleen and Me /feed. And if you pay £9, you can watch the film. If you don't want to pay £9, there's a very nice little trailer and you can just watch that. But that's available until July the 18th.
Excellent. Well, we'll put that out on social media from our channels. We'll also list everything on our show notes, and we'll wrap things up with a little bit of a clip from Mother of All Behans. But before I do that, Martin, any closing thoughts or anything we need to cover?
We could keep going here for quite some time. There is such a rich vein to mine in both your career and obviously members of your extended family. I was curious in reading Brendan of the Chelsea. The play makes reference to Brendan's son and obviously another relationship that he's having. I'm assuming that refers to Brendan Hemingway and the relationship that his mother had with Brendan himself. I think it's probably not terribly well known, although it's been in the press a little bit. I can't imagine, I don't know if you have any contact with Brendan Hemingway, that is, and the difficulty of being Ernest Hemingway's grandson at the same time being the son of Brendan Behan. Like, we're talking about two of the enfants terribles of literature. It must be kind of some crazy burden. But let me ask the simple question. I'm assuming that's what the reference is. Is that correct?
That is what the reference is. I know that Brendan thought that was his son because my auntie Paula produced and sent to me a photograph of the little boy that he showed to his brother Rory, Paula's husband. Whether there is any real relationship between those people or not, I don't know. Mm-hmm. I don't know. And my father said that it would have been very difficult because Brendan was not capable of getting a hard on, I think.
Which is brought out very nicely in the play.
He said, my father said after that circumcision, he didn't, I mean, that could have just been my father just not having a very clear idea of anatomy and so forth. But anyway, that was his opinion. His opinion was that it was impossible. So
something about needing a tow truck?
Yes, couldn't get it up with a tow truck. That's a lump. Yeah.
Ooh. Yeah, it's obviously a story that persists. And, you know, obviously we got to respect people's privacy, but there's kind of like this curiosity, I think, that all of us have, especially when you get the Hemingway name married up to the Behan name.
Yeah.
And interestingly, of course, Gregory Hemingway, who is Brendan's father, himself has, let's say, or had conflicted sexuality as well. Turns out to have been transsexual in Brendan. So there's all these kind of odd juxtapositions in the literary world.
I know. Yeah, time to bus in the therapists, I think. Yes, but all I can say is I hope he's left it all behind and is managing to lead his own happy life.
Yes, that's all, you know, we can ask for anybody.
Exactly.
I noticed we came across a piece where you said you were working on, I believe, a book. You're 45,000 words into it.
Yes.
Can you tell us a little bit about that?
Well, it's another one of those things. It's a bit like the play. My mother became very ill with Alzheimer's, and I thought I am in the frame for this. I have to look after this woman. So difficult, you know. She died just before Christmas, which was a blessing for her. And it's a blessing for her and definitely a blessing for me. But I thought what I will get out of this year is I'll go and do a novel writing course. So even though I can't act, because things were just opening up for me. So it sounds so selfish, doesn't it? But that's you know, people will understand who are in my situation. Unfortunately, there's far too many of them. So I I was arrogant enough to think I only needed the second year of the 2-year course. So was halfway through the course, the 1 year that I did the course, she got into a home, and so I then had to sell the house and all of that kind of stuff, which was very preoccupying. But I have persisted with the novel. People seem to think it's good. And I just wanted to write a book, not a kind of book that is going to make people run away or put their head in the gas oven in despair, but a book that is respectful but amusing, because I think people in extremis often are amusing, about what it's like to be the mother of a severely disabled child. Because I think that's a story that people are scared to tell because they don't want to be hurtful about the child, you know. But it's not an easy thing, and I think it's a story that needs to be told. I've set it in a kind of a big family saga because these things cause ripples that have ramifications for all the family. So anyway, I'm very, very much enjoying writing that, and steaming ahead.
A lot of ripples playing out across the generations in your work, Janet, and we'll look forward to seeing that come out, and we look forward to when you bring Mother of All Beings over to New York, as I hope you will.
I would love to do that.
And we are going to wrap up with a little segment of Mother of All the Beings. And before we do that, thanks. Great to see you again, and terrific to have this conversation.
Thank you, Janet. An absolute delight.
Thank you very much for having me.
On Sunday morning to Meath Street together we will go, and to old Father Murphy we both will make our vow. He'll join our hands in wedlock bands, and soon we'll be outside for a long afternoon on our honeymoon down by the Liffey side. I was born at 49 Capel Street, right in the middle of Dublin, in September 1889. My grandparents had a farm at Rathmaiden, near Slane, County Meath, and we used to go down there for holidays regularly. Mother was born in 1861. The famine was in 1845, and her mother lived all through it. I learned the ballads on the farm. The people would come in at night for a chat around the fire. There'd be about 20 there. When they were all gathered, tea would be made for them. I don't remember any drink, only tea. The people that came in at Rathmaiden were very happy. They'd talk about things, times long past, and then they'd say a big long rosary with a long trimming. I'd think it would never end. God, I was very young to be kneeling there listening to all this. I must have been about 7.
New York is my lord's, where I go for spiritual refreshment, a place where you're least likely to be bitten by a wild goat. Well, that was a quote from the very, very quotable Brian Behan, and it was the quote that would have appeared in Brendan at the Chelsea, Janet Behan's brilliant play, which as mentioned, I had a great association with. Really good to get to know Janet that way and to get to know Brian Behan a lot more that way. Also loved hearing her origin story for that play, how someone contacted her and said, did she know if somebody could do a treatment? And she said, of course, I can do it. And then, of course, she had to figure out what a treatment was. So great to hear that kind of, we hear this a lot, this sort of artistic drive and the overcoming obstacles to getting to the finish line. So I appreciate getting a chance to get to know Janet again and to relive some great memories with her and that play, Brendan at the Chelsea.
Yeah, John, it was a great opportunity to get more of an inside look on essentially a genius family. And that's the question I was interested in asking Janet. Is it genetic or is it environmental? Where does that spark come from? And whether her last name, the Behan name, is a blessing or a curse? And the answer to that is both. Janet struggled at times to get Irish parts because she was from London. And when she was in England, a lot of times she would disappoint by not being Irish enough. So real challenges there, trying to make your way out from underneath such a famous name. And it's clearly Janet's making her own mark right now. She has a new piece out called Kathleen and Me. It's an example of what creative people do in a time like COVID, where the stage is no longer available to you. And she made a one-woman show filmed by her husband in her living room, telling the story of our grandmother, Kathleen. I was fortunate enough that Janet sent me a copy of it to take a look at, and I'm looking forward to posting it in our show notes so everybody can actually see it as well. It's a great piece and a great piece of history.
I know also a mixed reaction when Janet realized she was old enough to play her grandmother in a film. So a lot of mixed messages. A woman with tremendous humor, a ready laugh, a ready smile. And another great exploration of that sort of global Irish identity that, am I Irish? Am I English? One quote stuck out to me. I think of myself as someone who is always on her knees, begging and pleading to be allowed into Ireland, culturally and psychologically.
Yeah, that's interesting. It's kind of like laying claim to essentially your inheritance. And sometimes it can be difficult. And that's one of the things that we're trying to do on Irish Stew. Make the path a little easier for all involved.
Well, Martin, a lot of our listeners ask how they can help spread the global Irish conversation. What do you think?
Best thing people can do to help out the podcast is to simply share the episode. If you like what you've heard so far in this episode or other episodes,
share it on social media, whether that's Facebook or whether that's Twitter or whether that's Instagram, or share it via email or word of mouth. All of those things are going to help us out. And don't be shy about dropping us a note. You can do so on our website.
Irish Stew is produced by John Lee, Martin Nutty, and Bill Schultz. Editing, mixing, and mastering by Bill Schultz. Music on Irish Stew was composed and performed by Rosa Nutty, with Donald Bowens on drums, Cathal O'Riordan on bass and synthesizer. For more on Rosa Nutty's music, please visit rosanutty.com.